Major Heather Penny of the Air National Guard. Where is Andrews in connection to Washington, D.C., and were you stationed there in 2001?
I was stationed at Andrews. That's where the 121st Fighter Squadron, the D.C. Air National Guard, is based and located at. And so the D.C. Air National Guard, the fighter side, the 121st Fighter Squadron, is on the east side of the base, which is really only about 8 nautical miles as the crow flies from the Pentagon. When the first aircraft hit the trade centers and it was clear to NORAD and 1st Air Force that they needed to defend America's skies, there was no clear authority to be able to reach down to us. So just as they couldn't reach down to us, we had no way to be able to reach up into them to get authorization to go fly. Really kind of the most that I could do was stand there and be ready to be tasked. As I watched my leadership in a very creative and ad hoc way try to reach up through their chain of command to be able to get authority to launch. When it was clear that there was a threat to the DC area, which we immediately assumed once that second aircraft had hit the World Trade Center.
Why did you assume that?
Because Washington, D.C. is the heart of the United States. It's the nation's capital. It was very clear to us that we needed to get airborne to be able to protect Washington, D.C. As I mentioned before, the challenge for us was how did we get authorization to be able to get airborne? National Guard units have 2 separate chains of command. We have a federal chain of command through the active duty air forces to the Secretary of Defense and to the President. You have to be mobilized to make that happen. Our other chain of command, which is the standing chain of command, is the state chain of command. It's the civilian. So we go up through the governor. Well, the D.C. Air National Guard doesn't go to the mayor of Washington, D.C. It actually goes up through the Secretary of the Army and ultimately to the President of the United States. So we were having to work our civilian chain of command to activate that to try and get permission to become airborne. What I was doing while my leadership was trying to energize the chain of command upward to get authorization to launch, I was basically programming the jets. So I was programming the data transfer cartridges. Our wing commander, General Worley, came down and was standing there at the ops desk trying to get information, again trying to energize the chain of command. One thing that was very special and unique about our situation being there at Andrews is that because Andrews is also the home of Air Force One, we had established a relationship with the Secret Service in the air traffic control tower. And so one of the things that was going on was that Dan Kane called the Secret Service, called the guys in the tower, folks that he knew through a personal relationship, to say, hey, we're here. We can help, have someone tell us what to do, and having General Worley begin to address that relationship as well.
Where were you and what do you remember you were thinking when you heard that another plane hit the Pentagon?
Sickened that we weren't airborne first.
The question that's haunted me from day one is how come the world's biggest military superpower was somehow oblivious to rogue airliners in American airspace for more than an hour. And our top brass seemed so befuddled in terms of dealing with hijackers, apparently using these 4 planes as flying bombs. Why couldn't our fighter jets intercept at least one of them? Aren't you confusing complicity with incompetence? Could people have not got it wrong on that day?
Well, not when we show the documents from June 1st, 2001 that changed the policy. If you want to look at government and understand when something's going on that shouldn't be, government runs under standard operating procedures most of the time. When those procedures are violated, that's usually the time that you better start looking close.
According to standard operating procedure, if an FAA flight controller notices anything that suggests a possible hijacking, the controller is to contact a superior. If the problem cannot be fixed within about a minute, the superior is to ask NORAD, the North American Aerospace Command, to send up or scramble jet fighters to find out what is going on. NORAD then issues a scramble order to the nearest Air Force base with fighters on alert. But although interceptions usually occur within 10 or so minutes, in this case, 80 or so minutes had elapsed before fighters were even airborne.
It's a mind-bending anomaly. Not a single U.S. Air Force interceptor turns a wheel until it's too late. There are no jets at all.
What struck me immediately, my father was director of air commerce under Franklin Roosevelt. My father, who was one of the original Army Air Force flyers in World War I, he had put in a lot of sort of safety things. In the event of a hijacking of a passenger liner or any plane that they knew about, that fighter planes would be scrambled, that is, sent up into air immediately within minutes in order to force the plane down, to change course, shoot it down if you had to. And you don't need orders from the president, the vice president, or anybody else. That's the law. Well, they didn't go up after 9/11. Everybody knew what had happened, and the planes were still on their way to Washington to hit the Pentagon, when suddenly from Otis Air Base comes one fighter plane. Otis Air Base is in Massachusetts. Might just as well have been in Canada. That was the only fighter plane which, according to law, they all should have been up there, and not one went up. Well, that could only happen if somebody had told them to stand down, not to respond to what was, after all, their sworn duty.
Months before 9/11, on June 1st, 2001, Dick Cheney ordered then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld to issue this order to NORAD and the Pentagon. The document revoked their standing orders to shoot down errant or hijacked aircraft and instructed them to stand down until they were given orders by the President, Vice President, or Secretary of Defense. Then on 9/11, NORAD and the Pentagon waited for over an hour while the attacks were taking place for the orders to defend America that never came.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Well, at the time I didn't know what all that meant. And
the flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Well, what it is simple. On June 1st of 2001, up until that time, it was up to base commanders to make the call. That if the FAA called and said a plane was in trouble or what have you was going on in the air, the base commander could make the determination, scramble the jets, and send them airborne. June 1st of that year, that policy was changed. And it was changed that no airplanes could be scrambled unless they received permission from the DoD, the Department of Defense, which meant you would have a stand down simply by Don Rumsfeld not answering the phone. And if you go back and look on September 11th, for over 2 hours, nobody could find Don Rumsfeld.
And Cheney was hiding out of the bunker and lied and said he got there 45 minutes later than he had. But Norman Panetta, the head of transportation, confirmed in 5 separate interviews and before Congress that Cheney was lying about being in there and saying the order still stood to basically not shoot down Flight 77 coming into the Pentagon.
My main concern is that in your testimony, you stated that Vice President Dick Cheney came into the POEC office at 9:20 when you arrived, and he was already there. He's gone in front of Meet the Press, and he said that he was there at 9:38.
They did that because they'd received a report that an airplane was headed for the White House.
This is Flight 77, which had left Dulles.
Flight 77. It left Dulles. As best we can tell, they came initially at the White House.
The plane actually circled the White House?
Didn't circle it, but was headed on a track into it.
Tracking it by radar.
And when it entered the danger zone and looked like it was headed for the White House was when they grabbed me and evacuated me to the basement. The plane obviously didn't hit the White House, turned away and we think flew a circle and came back in and then hit the Pentagon.
Yet the 9/11 was in there at 9:58 that morning.
9:58?
Yeah, I don't know if you got a chance to read it, but it puts him half an hour later. So I don't mean to ask a rhetorical question, but to the best of your recollection, was Vice President Dick Cheney already there at 9:20?
The flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon. This was
before Flight 76.
Before American Airlines went into the Pentagon.
And here is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff order for the stand down from June 1st, issued under the vice president's orders through Rumsfeld, and then right after 9/11, they rescinded their previous order and went back to the old shoot-down directive where the generals didn't have to get authorization before they shot down an errant aircraft, and they were begging that day, let us shoot them down, but they wouldn't give them the order.
Well, you know, what can you say? It's as clear as the nose on your face, and, you know, and like I said, for those that doubt, read it yourself.
And I'll show folks a document cam shot of that. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff instruction, aircraft piracy, hijacking, and destruction of derelict airborne objects. And in the cancellation of the document that was in place and then reauthorized in 97, but in place when NORAD was set up in 1957, it goes on to cancel CJCSI 3610.01 that authorized and had the default position for the Pentagon under NORAD control to shoot down any aircraft that were planned to be used as weapons or that were derelict and going to be crashing into population centers. Before they had that default position, if one was hijacked or going to be flown into a building, they said, you know, that you have the default to do that. Just like with Payne Stewart, they had the authorization already set to do it if need be.
A freakish, fatal accident involving a Lear jet flying across the country with no one in control. The plane was this 23-year-old Lear 35, and on board, Payne Stewart, one of the country's top golfers.
The Lear 35 took off from the Orlando airport about 9:20 this morning. Whatever trouble developed happened fairly quickly. Just 25 minutes into the flight, when the plane was just northwest of Gainesville, Florida, controllers lost radio contact with the pilots as the Lear was climbing to 39,000 feet. The plane should have taken a turn west toward Dallas, but it continued to track on a straight line northwest, and an Air Force F-16 on a training mission was sent to take a look. Ultimately, 6 military jets gave chase, one handing off to another as the plane flew on.
That's why they followed Payne Stewart's plane and followed it for a long period of time with their AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles ready. But when it was going into a rural area in a cornfield, they made the decision not to shoot it down. They didn't need to get a Dick Cheney authorization. But on that morning, Dick Cheney was there in control, not just signing this order June 1st and giving it to Rumsfeld months before 9/11, but he was there that morning in control in the bunker to make sure and to say, no, the order still stands.